My name is Alexander Williams, and I'm the owner of a company that pulls in an annual profit with more zeros than I care to count. I used to think life was all about control, about making the right moves, cutting the right deals, staying one step ahead of everyone. But that was before I met Agatha. Agatha was unlike anyone I'd ever known. We met on a resort vacation a few years ago. The time we were both escaping messy divorces, licking our wounds in our own ways, and not looking for anything serious. What started as a casual romance, sandy beaches, stolen glances, and the thrill of something new, turned into something neither of us had expected. By the end of that vacation, I didn't want to say goodbye. Neither did she. 1 month later, she moved in. Felt fast, impulsive, but right. Together, we've built something solid. A life intertwined with business and pleasure. Agatha and I are now partners, not just in the bedroom, but in the boardroom. We've taken risks, made investments, and now she's just as much a part of my business world as she is of my private life. But lately things feel different. This morning, as I was enjoying my coffee and trying to focus on the stock reports, Mary, my housekeeper, slipped into the room with that look on her face. Mary has been with me for years. She's reliable, efficient, and an incurable gossip. I don't trust half the things she says, but once she gets going, there's no stopping her. Mr. Williams, she began, her voice low, conspiratorial. I thought you should know a mess. Agatha was talking to Steve again yesterday. You know, the gardener. I looked up from my coffee, raising an eyebrow. And, well, Mary continued, clearly savoring the moment. They were out in the garden for over an hour, and from what I saw, there was a bit of laughing, a bit of, how shall I say, flirtation. I felt a strange prickle of annoyance. Agatha had always been friendly with people. It was one of the things that drew me to her, her warmth, her charm. But Steve, he was a good-looking guy, no doubt about it, with a ruggedness that contrasted sharply with my own more polished appearance. Still, he was just the gardener. Mary, you know Agatha, I said, brushing it off, though a sliver of doubt wedged itself in my mind. She's kind to everyone. I'm sure it was nothing. Mary pursed her lips, clearly disappointed I wasn't giving her the reaction she wanted. Of course, sir, but just thought you'd want to know. It looked a little more than friendly. As Mary left, I tried to shake off the feeling. She was a notorious gossip. She'd spun tales like this before, mostly baseless. But still, as I sipped my coffee, I found myself glancing out the window toward the garden. That evening, as Agatha and I sat down for dinner, I decided to bring it up. It gnawed at me all day, and I knew I wouldn't be able to relax until I heard her side of things. She looked radiant across from me, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, a sly smile on her lips as she caught me staring. "Something on your mind, Alexander?" she teased, her voice smooth. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my tone light. "Mary mentioned you were chatting with Steve again yesterday. Spent quite a bit of time with him, apparently." Agatha's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Oh? And since when did my friendly conversation with our gardener become headline news?" I chuckled, though it sounded forced even to me. "I'm just curious. He seems interesting. To you, maybe?" She laughed. A rich, genuine laugh that made me feel foolish for even asking. Leaning over, she placed her hand on mine, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Alexander, please. If I wanted rugged and earthy, I'd buy myself a mountain cabin. I love you, not the gardener." Her words were light, playful, and she squeezed my hand in reassurance. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me, a part one didn't want to admit to, felt a pang of insecurity. Agatha was younger than me by almost a decade, a fact I rarely thought about, but in moments like this it came crashing back. What if she missed something I couldn't give her? Something simpler, less complicated? Sensing my unease, Agatha leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You don't need to worry about anyone else, Alexander. Her fingers brushed my cheek, and I felt my doubts begin to fade, replaced by something warmer, deeper. Before I knew it, the tension between us had dissolved into something else entirely, something passionate. We left the half-eaten dinner on the table, our conversation forgotten. As we moved through the house, entangled in each other, Agatha looked at me intently, her gaze so deep it felt like she could see all my doubts and fears laid bare. Slowly, she touched my face, tracing her fingers along my cheek, a soft smile playing at her lips. You're the only man I need, Alexander. The only one, she whispered, her voice tender, almost like a vow. Her words melted the ice that had built up inside me, washing away the remnants of jealousy and insecurity. Felt like more than just reassurance. It was a promise, a reminder of the bond we shared and the connection that kept us together. Her lips brushed against mine, gently at first, as if giving me time to let her sincerity sink in. But then the kiss deepened, growing more passionate. She pulled me closer as though determined to erase every trace of doubt, every flicker of jealousy. We moved through the house, leaving all worries behind, until we found ourselves in the dim light of the living room. Her laughter was warm and rich as she held me close, her hands pulling me in as if she couldn't bear even an inch of distance. With each touch, each kiss, we rekindled our closeness, reigniting the trust and unity between us. When we finally made it to the bedroom, our pace slowed, our movements becoming softer, filled with warmth and trust. Eventually, we lay together in the dark, her head resting on my chest, her breathing steady and calm. I traced my fingers along her shoulder, feeling the tension drain away, allowing myself to forget every doubt and simply be here with her. But even in that quiet moment, as Agatha drifted off to sleep beside me, I felt a faint whisper, lingering in the back of my mind, a question I couldn't quite silence. But what if? The next morning, just as I was settling into my study with a fresh cup of coffee and the financial reports, Mary appeared in the doorway, looking as if she'd been waiting for the perfect moment. She was a small woman, unassuming in stature, but she had a knack for lurking in the shadows, always managing to materialize whenever she thought she had news worth sharing. Mr. Williams, she said, her tone dripping with self-importance, I thought you should know something unusual I saw last night. I sighed inwardly. After yesterday's little saga about Agatha and Steve, our gardener, I'd hoped Mary might find a different hobby. But from the gleam in her eye, it was clear she hadn't given up her habit of stirring the pot. All right, Mary, what is it this time? She stepped closer, glancing around as if the very walls might be listening. I saw Ms. Agatha coming out of one of the upstairs rooms last night, with a painting in her hands. I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my expression neutral. A painting? Yes, sir. One of the older ones. It looked like it was from the East Wing, she said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. The historical pieces, if I'm not mistaken. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. The paintings in the East Wing were indeed valuable, not just monetarily but also historically. This house, my estate, had once belonged to a minor English king, an eccentric royal who'd filled it with secret passages, hidden rooms, and artifacts from various corners of the empire. It was part of what I loved about the place, its mystery, its depth. I'd spent years restoring it to its former glory, preserving its art and secrets. But Agatha, taking a painting from one of the rooms, sounded absurd. Mary, I think you might be mistaken, I said, trying to sound polite. Why would Agatha take a painting? She has everything she needs in this house. If she wanted to look at one of the pieces more closely, she'd have told me. Mary folded her arms, giving me a look that suggested she thought I was terribly naive. With all due respect, sir, sometimes people want things they don't need. And sometimes, she leaned in, lowering her voice, sometimes they don't want you to know. I felt a flicker of irritation. Mary, I appreciate your concern, but you're making it sound like Agatha's hiding something. Why would she? Mary's mouth twisted into a sour little smile. Well, sir, she wasn't exactly born into a place like this, was she? Some people might not understand the value of what they're holding in their hands. Or worse, they might see it as an opportunity. She looked up at me, her gaze sharp, calculating. Not everyone has your appreciation for history, Mr. Williams. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. I could see the envy in her eyes, the slight sneer whenever she mentioned Agatha's name. Mary had always been possessive of this house, of its secrets, as if she herself had some claim to it simply from years of service. And while she'd never said it directly, it was obvious she didn't approve of Agatha. To her, Agatha was an outsider, a woman who, despite her beauty and charm, didn't belong in a house this grand with treasures this old. But I knew Agatha. She wasn't like that. She respected the history of this place. She loved it, just as much as I did. Mary, I said, forcing a smile, I think you're letting your imagination run wild. First the gardener, now this? It sounds like you're looking for problems where there aren't any. She pressed her lips together, clearly annoyed that I wasn't taking her seriously. I'm only telling you what I saw, sir. And if you ask me, someone who moves through the house at night taking things, it's suspicious. I'd hate to see you hurt, Mr. Williams. Sometimes, people aren't who they pretend to be. I clenched my jaw, feeling the heat of anger rise in me. Mary had crossed a line implying that Agatha, my partner, my lover, was some kind of gold digger or thief. Enough, Mary. Trust Agatha. Whatever you think you saw, I'm sure it was nothing. Mary gave a small, bitter sigh, a look of disappointment on her face, as if she thought I was being a fool. Very well, sir. I'm only trying to help. You know where to find me if you change your mind. She left the room with a huff, and I sat there, fingers drumming against the arm of my chair, trying to shake off the irritation her words had stirred in me. Mary had always been loyal in her own way, but her jealousy of Agatha was obvious. Since Agatha moved in, Mary had found endless ways to imply that my choice was a mistake, that Agatha didn't belong in a house like this, in a life like mine. I tried to push it from my mind, but Mary's words left a sour taste. I didn't believe her, not really. Agatha wouldn't sneak around the house at night, taking things. She knew how much these paintings meant to me, but still a tiny thread of doubt wormed its way into my thoughts, whispering questions I didn't want to hear. What was she doing in the East Wing? I tried to tell myself that Mary was simply stirring up trouble, letting her jealousy and bitterness cloud her judgment. But the doubt lingered, gnawing at me in quiet moments until I couldn't ignore it any longer. So one night after dinner, I found myself quietly observing Agatha. She mentioned she was heading to the library to read, as she often did. I watched her go, expecting to see her settle into her usual chair by the fire. But instead she paused outside the library door, glancing around carefully before slipping through a narrow door, hidden by an old tapestry, a passageway that led outside toward the gardens. My heart quickened as I moved through the dark, narrow passageway, each step echoing softly against the old stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of must and thyme, and the faded tapestries that lined the corridor seemed to watch me, silently absorbing secrets just as they had for centuries. I'd used this hidden path only a few times before, mostly out of curiosity about my estate's eccentric design. But tonight it was something else that drove me forward, a deep, unsettling need for answers. When I reached the end of the passage, I paused, peering out from the shadows, trying to calm my breathing. I could see Agatha crossing the grounds, moving toward the small, unassuming gardener's shed at the far edge of the estate. Every instinct told me to turn back, to let her keep whatever secrets she had hidden there. But I was rooted in place, a silent witness to the unraveling of the life I thought I understood. She reached the shed, her hand lingering on the door before she slipped inside. Quietly, I moved closer, positioning myself at a narrow crack in the wood where I could see inside. Without being seen, what I saw stole the breath from my lungs. Inside the dim shed, amidst piles of discarded onion skins and garden debris, was Agatha, wrapped in the arms of Steve, our gardener. The scene before me felt surreal, almost grotesque in its intimacy. Her dark hair spilled over her shoulders, loose and wild, catching the pale moonlight that seeped through the shed's single window. She was still, dressed in the elegant silk gown she'd worn at dinner, but it was now wrinkled and stained, clinging to her form in ways that felt raw and unguarded. There was a wildness in her posture, a complete abandonment of the refined composure she usually wore like armor. Steve's hands roamed over her with a rough familiarity, his fingers leaving faint smudges of dirt along her arms, her shoulders, marking her skin with the grime of his labor. She seemed completely oblivious to the dirt, the disheveled surroundings, to anything but him. Her eyes were closed, her face soft and almost serene, as though she'd let go of every restraint, surrendering to a world beyond anything we shared. There was something achingly vulnerable in her expression, a quiet intensity that I'd never seen in her before. It was as if she was someone else entirely, a stranger who had nothing to hide, nothing to hold back. The shed itself was a crude setting for such a moment. The onion skins scattered haphazardly across the floor, mingled with bits of soil and leaves, clinging to her dress and bare skin. Her once pristine gown was caught up in the disarray, its elegance lost among the remnants of garden work. And yet, there she was, looking almost luminous in the moonlight, as though the filth surrounding her only emphasized her allure. The contrast was unbearable. A woman I'd once thought of as polished, refined, now lost in a scene that was both surreal and sordid. Each second I stood there, watching them, the knot in my chest tightened, growing into something darker, heavier. Agatha, the woman I'd loved, trusted, shared my life with, was nowhere to be found in this moment. In her place was a stranger, someone capable of abandoning all pretense, all dignity, for this raw and reckless intimacy. The scene felt like a mockery, a twisted parody of the life we'd built together, reduced to something primal, something hidden and cheap. I finally forced myself to turn away, my pulse pounding in my ears, my thoughts a chaotic mix of fury and disbelief. As I walked back through the dark passage, each step echoing with the finality of what I'd seen, I knew that everything had changed. The Agatha I thought I knew, the woman I'd built my life around, was gone, replaced by someone distant, unreachable, and achingly unfamiliar. And as much as it tore at me, I realized with a hollow ache that I would never see her the same way again. After what I witnessed in the garden shed that night, I knew I couldn't let Agatha's betrayal go unanswered. She'd not only broken my trust but had dragged my name, my home, and everything I valued through the mud. Her affair with Steve, our gardener, was one thing, but the thought that she might be selling off my prized paintings to keep her failing business afloat was too much to bear. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a complete dismantling of the life we'd built together, and I intended to make her feel the full weight of her choices. But I wasn't going to confront her directly. Agatha valued her reputation above all else, her polished public image, her connections, the admiration of our friends and business associates. I knew that to truly make her understand the cost of her actions, I'd have to take that from her, to expose her in a way that would leave her with nothing but her shame. So I set my plan into motion. I began by arranging a grand charity gala at our mansion, a high-profile event with guests from all corners of our social circle. I invited business leaders, press, society figures, and even a few of her clients, framing it as a celebration of our success and hinting that I'd be making an exciting business announcement. Agatha was thrilled. She'd assumed this was my way of publicly showing support for her, of putting rumors about her failing business to rest. She spent days preparing, choosing her finest gown, rehearsing her role as the perfect partner by my side. But my real plan was already in place. On the night of the event, just as the party was in full swing, I had a trusted staff member discreetly slip 2 notes, one to Agatha and one to Steve. Agatha's note read, "Meet me in the garden shed. I have something special planned for us tonight." And Steve's note was equally simple, "Come to the garden shed. Agatha will be waiting for you." I watched from across the room as Agatha read the note, her face lighting up in a way that made my stomach twist with anger. She excused herself from a conversation with a small, coy smile and slipped away, making her way toward the garden. Moments later, I saw Steve follow, looking equally eager, glancing around to make sure no one was watching him leave. They both thought they were sneaking away undetected, but in reality, I'd arranged for every detail of their little rendezvous to be observed. Once they were out of sight, I quietly signaled to the reporters I'd invited under the guise of covering my announcement. I hinted that there was something interesting happening in the garden shed and that they might want to investigate. I watched as the photographers and a few of our most curious guests followed my lead, cameras at the ready, their expressions a mix of confusion and intrigue. I stayed back, watching from the shadows as the scene unfolded. Agatha and Steve were already inside the shed when the reporters arrived, oblivious to everything but each other. Through the open door I could see them clearly. Agatha in her elegant evening gown, her arms wrapped around Steve as she kissed him passionately. Her polished exterior had completely vanished, replaced by a raw, impulsive version of herself I had only glimpsed in the past. She looked disheveled, her hair tousled, her hands clinging to him as though she couldn't bear to let go. And Steve, in his work clothes, looked rough and earthy, his hands leaving dirt smudges on her satin dress as he pulled her closer. It was a grotesque parody of love, staged right in the heart of my estate. And then, with perfect timing, the cameras began to flash. The bright bursts of light filled the shed, illuminating Agatha and Steve in a harsh, unforgiving glare. She froze, pulling away from him as her eyes widened in horror, realizing what was happening. Steve staggered back, equally stunned, his face going pale as the reality sank in. "Ms. Agatha," one of the reporters called out, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "Care to explain what's going on here?" Agatha's hands flew to her mouth, her face flushed, her carefully maintained composure shattered. She looked from Steve to the reporters, then back to me, her gaze pleading, desperate. But I didn't step in to help. I simply watched, my expression cold and unyielding. Our guests had followed the commotion and were now gathered at the door, whispering, murmuring, their faces filled with shock and judgment. The pristine image of Agatha they had known was gone, replaced by the woman standing before them, caught in a sordid, humiliating moment with a man who was not her husband. Alexander, Please, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, but I could hear the panic in it. She took a step toward me, but I didn't move, didn't offer her the lifeline she was desperately searching for. I met her gaze, letting her see the satisfaction in my eyes. I think the reporters would love to hear about your little arrangement, Agatha, I said, my voice calm, cold. After all, they came, expecting an announcement tonight. Why not give them one? Her face went pale, and I knew she understood. Her affair was no longer a secret, and her reputation, the reputation she'd built so carefully, was in ruins. The reporters continued to snap photos, capturing her every expression, every desperate glance, as she tried and failed to piece her dignity back together. She looked like a trapped animal, exposed and humiliated with nowhere to run. I turned and walked away, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. As I stepped back into the warmth of the mansion, I could still hear the distant murmurs of the crowd, the sharp clicks of the cameras, and Agatha's voice, pleading with them to stop, to listen, to understand. But it was too late. The woman I once loved was gone, replaced by a stranger, who now stood alone, lost in the wreckage of her own making.